The bidding room was silent, and that silence scared me more than any shout ever could. I stood at the back of the auction hall on Kethra Station, my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets, watching rows of empty chairs stretch out in front of an empty stage. Not one bidder had come, not one broker, not one scavenger crew, not even the usual pack of junk dealers who showed up for every wreck sale in this sector, hoping to strip a dead ship for parts and sell the scraps to whoever paid first. Today, the room held only me, the auctioneer, and two bored security guards, leaning against the far wall, like they wanted to be anywhere else. My name is Ethan Barlow, and I had exactly 140 credits to my name, a busted cargo hauler with a cracked engine coil, and a debt collector who had already called me twice that week. I was not supposed to be here. I was supposed to be fixing my hauler, or finding a real job, or doing anything other than standing in a half-lit auction hall, waiting to bid on a ship that nobody else wanted. But that was exactly why I came. Lot 42, the auctioneer said, his voice flat and tired, echoing off the empty seats. Designation Wraithkeel, salvage class, unknown origin, recovered adrift near the threshold belt 11 months ago. Starting bid, 1,000 credits. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. I almost laughed. A ship like that, even as scrap metal, should have pulled in bids from 3 different systems. Instead, the auctioneer stood there, shifting his weight, glancing at the door like he expected someone to walk in and save him from this awkward silence. I had done my research before coming here. That was the one thing I was good at, digging through old shipping logs and station records until I found the story nobody wanted to tell out loud. The Wraithkeel had been towed in by a salvage tug 11 months ago, found drifting cold and dark near the edge of a debris field. The tug captain who found it sold his rights to a trading company within a week and left the sector entirely. The trading company tried to move it twice, and both times the deal fell through at the last moment. No explanation given. Then the company that owned it went quiet. Its offices closed. Its staff transferred out or simply vanished from the records. 3 owners, 3 disappearances. And now here it sat, offered for scrap price at an auction that every serious buyer in the sector had somehow decided to skip. I should have found that suspicious. I did find it suspicious. But desperate men do not always listen to good sense, and I was about as desperate as they came. "Do I have an opening bid?" the auctioneer asked again, and this time there was an edge of pleading in his voice, like he just wanted this lot finished so he could move on to something easier. I raised my hand. 1,000. The auctioneer blinked at me like he had forgotten a person was actually standing in the room. 1,000 credits, from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 1,100? Silence. Going once. Nobody stirred. Going twice. One of the security guards checked the time on his wrist display, clearly bored out of his mind. Sold, to lot buyer number 7, for 1,000 credits. And that was it. No cheering, no rival bidders scowling at me, no congratulations. Just a tired man stamping a data tablet and waving me forward to sign the transfer paperwork, like I had bought a used engine part instead of an entire warship. I walked up to the small counter at the front of the hall, my boots echoing far too loudly against the polished floor. The clerk behind the counter did not even look up as she slid the contract toward me. "Full transfer of ownership," she said. "Ship is currently docked at Bay 19, Outer Ring. You will need a tow authorization to move it, since its main engines are not registered as operational. Do you want the standard insurance package?" "No," I said. I did not have the credits for insurance, not after this purchase. She nodded, like she expected that answer, and pushed a second form toward me. "Sign here, here, and here." "Congratulations on your purchase, Mr. Barlow." I signed my name 3 times, my hand steadier than I felt inside, and just like that, I owned a warship. A real one, built for war, sitting quiet and dark in a docking bay, less than 2 kilometers from where I stood. I should have felt excited. Instead, a strange chill settled into my chest, the kind you get when you walk into a room and sense, without any real proof, that something inside it is watching you. I told myself it was nerves. New ship, new debt, new problems, that was all. I was wrong, but I would not understand how wrong for several more hours. Outside the auction hall, the station corridors buzzed with their usual noise, cargo loaders shouting numbers back and forth, vendors calling out prices for fried noodles and synthetic fruit, a group of Voranthi traders arguing loudly over a shipment manifest near the transit lift. Normal life, going on exactly as it always did, completely unaware that I had just bought something that 3 previous owners could not hold on to. I stopped by the transit lift and checked the public shipping boards out of habit, scanning for any listings about the Wraithkeel, any old news stories, anything that might tell me more about what I had just purchased. Most of what came up was old and useless, standard recovery notices from 11 months ago, a dry paragraph about the debris field where it had been found, nothing about why it kept changing hands. But one thing caught my eye. A short comment, buried in an old maintenance forum, posted by someone using the handle Dockworker9. It read, "Stay off that ship. Whatever it is not junk. My cousin worked cargo detail near Bay 19, the week they first towed it in, and he said the tow crew refused to go below deck 3. Every single one of them. Company fired half of them for refusing orders, and the other half quit before they could be fired." The post had no replies, no follow-up, just that one warning, sitting alone in a sea of ignored comments, like a message in a bottle nobody had bothered to read. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling that same chill creep back into my chest. Then I closed the board and told myself the same thing I always told myself when fear tried to talk me out of a decision I had already made. Fear is not proof. Fear is just fear. I made my way toward Bay 19. The outer ring of Kethra Station was the oldest and least maintained section, home to docking bays too large and too expensive for most independent haulers to rent. Freight companies used to keep warehouses out here decades ago, back when the station handled heavier industrial traffic. Now half the bays sat empty, their doors rusted shut, their old company logos faded into gray smears on the metal. Bay 19 was near the end of the ring, past a row of dead docking clamps and a maintenance corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and old coolant. A single flickering light marked the entrance, buzzing every few seconds like it could not decide whether to stay lit or give up entirely. And beyond the bay door, held in place by heavy magnetic clamps, sat the Wraithkeel. Even from the viewing platform, even through several layers of reinforced glass, the ship was massive. Far larger than I had expected from the auction listing, which had described it only in vague technical terms, mass and length figures, that meant little until you actually stood in front of the thing. Its hull was a deep charcoal gray, scarred in long lines across the plating, like something enormous had once tried to tear through the armor and failed. No visible weapons, no obvious markings, no company logo or fleet insignia that I recognized from any species I had traded with over the years. It looked old, not old like rusted and forgotten, but old like it had survived things that should have destroyed it many times over and simply refused to stop existing. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at it, feeling smaller than I had felt in a long time. Then a dock technician walked up beside me, clipboard in hand, glancing between me and the ship with an expression I could not quite read. "You the new owner?" he asked. "That's me," I said. "Ethan Barlow." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that name away somewhere important. "Congratulations, I guess. You want a tow crew to move her out of the bay, or are you planning to fly her yourself?" "Fly her myself, if her engines are actually functional." "That's the thing," the technician said, lowering his voice slightly, even though there was nobody else around to hear him. "Nobody's actually gotten her engines to respond, not properly. We ran basic diagnostics when she first came in, enough to confirm there's still power somewhere deep in the hull, but the main systems won't answer any external command. Whole crew that towed her in said the same thing, over and over. Power readings that don't match anything we can explain. Doors that lock and unlock on their own. Some of the guys refused to go past Deck 3. There it was again. Deck 3. The exact same detail from that old forum post, confirmed by a total stranger who had no reason to make it up. "Did anyone ever find out why?" I asked. The technician shrugged, but it was not a careless shrug. It was the kind of shrug a person gives when they know more than they want to say out loud. "Above my pay grade. All I know is, 3 different owners walked away from this ship without collecting a single credit in resale value, and none of them wanted to talk about why when I asked. You want my honest opinion, Mr. Barlow? Go ahead. Sell her back for parts before you ever set foot inside. Whatever's wrong with that ship, it's not the kind of wrong that gets fixed. I looked at him, then back at the ship, its dark hull sitting silent and massive behind the reinforced glass, waiting. Somewhere deep inside all that armor plating, something was still drawing power, still holding on, after who knew how many years of drifting alone in the dark between stars. Thanks for the warning, I said, but I already own her. The technician gave me one last look, the kind that said he thought I was making a serious mistake, then walked away without another word, his footsteps fading down the corridor. I stayed at the viewing platform a while longer, alone with the ship and my own thoughts. I told myself I was simply studying the hull design, looking for clues about her origin, planning my approach for tomorrow when I would finally board her. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that some part of me could not stop staring at her, the same way you cannot stop staring at a closed door in an empty house when you are certain, without any real reason, that something on the other side is staring back. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the narrow bunk of my rented room near the docking ring, staring up at the ceiling, running numbers in my head that had nothing to do with money. 3 owners, 3 disappearances, or at least 3 unexplained departures, each one leaving faster than the one before. A crew that refused to go past deck 3. A dock technician who genuinely seemed to believe I was making a mistake, not out of politeness, but out of real concern. And yet, underneath all of that worry, sat a colder, more practical thought that would not leave me alone. I had bought this ship for 1,000 credits. Even as pure scrap metal, stripped down to raw plating and wiring, a hull that size was worth easily 50 times that amount, maybe more. If I could get even a fraction of her systems working, if I could prove she was flight capable, her value would climb even higher. This was, on paper, the best deal I had ever made in my entire life. All I had to do was go inside and find out what was actually wrong with her. I told myself that fear was not proof. I told myself that 3 previous owners had probably just been unlucky, or superstitious, or simply overwhelmed by a ship too large and strange for a small trading company to properly maintain. I told myself a dozen reasonable explanations, one after another, until exhaustion finally pulled me under sometime near dawn. I dreamed, briefly, of a long dark corridor, and a voice calling a name that was not quite mine, but close enough that some part of me answered anyway. I woke before my alarm, heart pounding, and did not remember the rest of the dream at all. By the time morning light filtered weakly through my window, I had already made my decision, the same decision I had already made the moment I raised my hand in that empty auction hall. I packed a small kit, a portable scanner, a hand light, a basic tool set, and enough emergency rations for a full day, in case her internal systems truly were as unpredictable as everyone claimed. Then I walked back toward Bay 19, toward the ship that nobody else in the entire sector had wanted to touch, and I did not look back. Whatever waited inside the Wraithkeel, I was about to become the first person in 11 months to walk past Deck 3 and find out. The airlock groaned open like it had been waiting 11 months for someone foolish enough to ask. I stood at the threshold of the Wraithkeel with my hand light raised, my scanner strapped to my wrist, and my heart beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Cold air rolled out past me, carrying a faint metallic smell, like old wiring and something else underneath it that I could not quite name. Behind me, the docking bay hummed with the ordinary noise of Kethra Station, distant machinery, distant voices. Ahead of me, only darkness. Well, I said out loud, mostly to hear my own voice. No turning back now. I stepped inside. The moment my boots touched the deck plating, the overhead lighting flickered to life in a slow wave, section by section, stretching away from me down a long corridor until the far end disappeared into shadow. I froze, half expecting an alarm, a voice, anything. Nothing came, just quiet light, humming faintly, illuminating a hallway that looked like it had been built for people my own size, my own shape, walking on two legs through doorways sized for a human frame. That detail should not have surprised me as much as it did. Ships came in all shapes, built for whatever species designed them, and there was no reason a human-shaped corridor could not belong to some alien culture that simply resembled us by coincidence. The galaxy was full of strange convergences like that. Still, something about the proportions felt too exact, too familiar, like walking into a house you had never visited before and somehow already knowing where the kitchen was. I checked my scanner. Life support readings showed breathable atmosphere, slightly cold but within safe range. Gravity, standard. Radiation, negligible. Whatever had kept this ship silent and abandoned for who knew how many years, it was not because the environment inside had turned hostile. If anything, the ship felt like it had been waiting for someone to walk through that door and turn the lights back on. I moved forward slowly, scanner held out in front of me, hand light sweeping left and right across doorways that lined the corridor. Most were sealed shut, their control panels dark and unresponsive. A few showed faint traces of power, thin lines of blue light tracing the edges of the frame, but none of them opened when I pressed my palm against the access panel. Deck 3, the technician had said. Deck 3, the forum post had said. I checked the small directory plate mounted near the first junction, its lettering faded but still legible. According to the layout, I was currently on Deck 5, near what the plate labeled as crew quarters. Deck 3 sat 2 levels below me, closer to the ship's core. I found the stairwell without much trouble, a narrow shaft running down through the center of the ship, lit by the same slow wave of lights that had greeted me at the airlock. Each level I passed showed the same pattern, doors sealed, lights waking as I approached, then dimming again once I moved past. It felt less like walking through a dead ship and more like walking through a creature slowly opening one eye after another, tracking my progress without ever fully waking. By the time I reached the landing marked Deck 3, my hands had gone slightly numb from gripping my scanner too tightly. The corridor here looked different from the ones above, wider, for one thing, with reinforced plating along the walls and floor that suggested this section had been built to withstand serious damage. Thick blast doors sat at intervals along the hallway, each one marked with symbols I did not recognize at first glance, though something about their shapes tugged uncomfortably at the edge of my memory, like words in a language I had once known and mostly forgotten. I approached the nearest door and pressed my palm against the access panel, the same way I had upstairs, not really expecting it to respond. The door slid open without hesitation. I stumbled back half a step, more from surprise than fear, watching as the heavy blast door retracted smoothly into the wall, revealing a room bathed in soft blue light. Every other sealed door on this ship had ignored me completely. This one opened like it recognized me, like it had been waiting specifically for my hand and no one else's. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, scanner trembling slightly in my grip, before finally stepping inside. The room beyond was some kind of storage or archive space, lined with narrow data racks, stretching from floor to ceiling, each one glowing faintly with rows of small indicator lights. In the center of the room stood a raised console, its surface dark except for a single pulsing light near its base, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. I approached the console carefully, scanning it as I went, though my equipment could tell me little beyond confirming it was drawing power from somewhere deep within the ship. Up close, I could see faint markings etched into the metal frame around the console, worn down by time but still visible if I tilted my hand light at the right angle. Letters, actual letters, not alien symbols, not some unfamiliar script that belonged to a species I had never encountered. English letters, the same alphabet I had grown up reading, stamped into the metal in a clean, blocky military style. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer, tracing the words with my hand light. Unit designation, Wraithkeel. Hull class, Sentinel. Property of the Terran Defense Fleet. I read it 3 times before the meaning fully settled into my chest. Terran, Earth, human. I had heard the old stories, of course, the same half-forgotten legends everyone in this sector grew up hearing in one form or another. Long before most of the current galactic community had ever encountered each other, before trade routes and treaties and shared stations like Kethra existed, there had supposedly been a great war, fought by a species that called itself human, a species that had once possessed technology and military strength that put every other faction of that era to shame. And then, according to the stories, that species had simply vanished, withdrawn, gone dark, leaving behind scattered ruins and unreliable rumors that most serious historians treated as myth rather than history. I had never given those stories much thought. Every culture had its legends about a lost golden age, some ancient power that used to rule the stars before fading into memory. I always assumed the human legend was exactly that, a story, exaggerated over generations until nobody could separate fact from fiction anymore. Standing in that room, staring at the word Terran stamped into cold metal that had clearly been manufactured, not imagined, I no longer felt so certain. My scanner buzzed softly against my wrist, and I glanced down to see a new reading appear on the small display, one that made my pulse spike even harder than the discovery of the inscription had. Active power signature detected, originating from Deck 1, ship core, signal strength increasing. Something on this ship had just turned on. I backed slowly away from the console, my hand light sweeping the room one more time, half expecting shadows to move where they should not. Nothing did. The room remained still, silent, except for that faint pulsing light at the base of the console, steady and unbothered, as if it had simply been waiting patiently for someone to finally read what was written on its casing. I left the archive room and returned to the corridor, my footsteps echoing louder than I would have liked in the wide, reinforced hallway. The power reading on my scanner continued to climb, slow but steady, originating from somewhere deep below me. Every instinct told me to turn around, to climb back up that narrow stairwell, seal the airlock behind me, and walk straight to the nearest station authority to report what I had found. But another part of me, the same stubborn part that had raised my hand in an empty auction hall the day before, refused to leave without understanding what exactly I had bought. I found the next stairwell and continued downward, Deck 2 passing in much the same pattern as the levels above it, sealed doors, waking lights, wide reinforced corridors that felt built for a purpose far more serious than simple cargo transport. By the time I reached the landing marked Deck 1, my scanner's power reading had climbed high enough that the display had shifted from a simple number into a flashing warning icon, urging me to reconsider proceeding any further. I did not listen. Deck 1 opened into a massive chamber unlike anything I had passed through so far, a wide circular room with a domed ceiling that curved high overhead, lined with dark view screens and rows of dormant control stations arranged in a half circle around a raised central platform. This, I realized with a slow, creeping certainty, was the bridge. At the center of the platform stood a single column of dark glass, roughly my own height, humming faintly with the same steady pulse I had felt from the archive console 2 decks above. As I stepped closer, cautious, scanner held out in front of me like a shield that would do absolutely nothing to protect me from whatever waited here, the glass column began to glow. Soft light bloomed from somewhere deep inside it, shifting slowly from a dull red to a clean, steady blue. Lines of text scrolled rapidly across its surface, far too fast for me to read, before settling into a single, simple phrase that hung there, waiting. Command authority detected. Awaiting confirmation. My mouth had gone completely dry. I stood frozen in front of that glowing column, every instinct screaming at me to run, while something deeper and quieter inside me simply stood still, waiting to see what would happen next. I don't understand what that means, I said out loud, my voice sounding far smaller than I wanted it to, in that wide, silent chamber. The column pulsed once, brighter, and a new line of text appeared beneath the first. Voice print analysis complete. Genetic marker analysis complete. Welcome aboard. I took an involuntary step backward, my boots scraping against the deck plating, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Whatever this system was, it had just scanned me somehow, without my permission, without me ever consenting to anything, and it had drawn a conclusion that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up straight. A third line appeared, and this one, more than anything else I had read on that ship so far, told me exactly why 3 previous owners had walked away without collecting a single credit. Reclamation protocol standing by. State your designation, Commander. I stared at those words for a long, long moment, the weight of them settling slowly into my chest like cold water. Commander, not owner, not visitor, not even captain. In the ordinary sense, a salvage broker might expect to hear from a ship he had just purchased at auction. Commander, whatever the Wraithkeel actually was, whatever purpose she had been built for so many generations ago, she was no longer simply asking who I was. She was waiting for an order. I opened my mouth to answer, and somewhere far below the deck plating beneath my feet, deep in the belly of the ship, I felt something enormous shift, slow and heavy, like a sleeping giant finally beginning to stir after a very, very long rest. State your designation, Commander, the column repeated, its blue light pulsing steadily, patient in a way that felt almost worse than urgency would have. I stood there on the bridge of a warship that should not exist, staring at a glowing pillar of glass that had just called me by a rank I had never earned, and I genuinely did not know what to say. Every reasonable part of my mind told me to say nothing at all, to back slowly out of that chamber, climb every stairwell I had descended, and leave this ship exactly as dark and silent as I had found it. But my mouth, apparently working on its own instincts, answered before the rest of me could stop it. Ethan Barlow, I said. I'm not a commander, I'm a salvage broker. I bought this ship at auction yesterday. The column pulsed brighter, and lines of text scrolled rapidly across its surface again, too fast to follow, before settling into a response that made my stomach twist with unease. Designation accepted. Genetic marker classification confirmed as Terran, primary lineage. Command authority granted under Reclamation Protocol, subsection 7. Welcome home, Commander Barlow. I'm not, I started to say, then stopped myself, because arguing with a machine about my own genetics felt like a losing battle before it even began. What is this ship? What are you? The light inside the column shifted, and for the first time, a voice answered me directly, not through scrolling text, but through speakers I had not even noticed built into the walls around the chamber. The voice was calm, measured, and unnervingly warm, like someone who had been waiting a very long time to finally have a conversation again. I am the primary intelligence core of TDF Sentinel-class vessel Wraithkeel, hull designation 741. You may refer to me as Echo, if a simplified designation is preferable for daily communication. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. A ship that could talk was not, on its own, particularly unusual in this era of galactic travel. Most modern vessels carried at least a basic navigational intelligence, capable of holding simple conversations about fuel levels and course corrections, but something about the way Echo spoke felt different, older, carrying a weight that no modern shipboard system I had ever dealt with possessed. How long have you been out here? I asked, drifting, before the tug crew found you? There was a pause before Echo answered, brief but noticeable. Records indicate my last confirmed contact with Terran Defense Fleet Command occurred approximately 11,412 standard years ago, measured against current galactic calendar conversion. I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that echoed strangely off the domed ceiling above me. That's not possible. No ship survives that long. No power system lasts that long. You're malfunctioning. I understand your skepticism, Commander, Echo said, its tone patient rather than defensive. However, my internal chronometer has remained continuously operational since the day of my last recorded contact, protected by systems specifically designed to endure extended periods of dormancy. I have not malfunctioned. I have simply been waiting. Waiting for what? For a genetic match to confirm command authority, Echo said. Waiting for you, Commander. A cold, uneasy feeling settled deeper into my chest. 11,000 years. I tried to imagine what that number actually meant, tried to picture the sheer scale of time this ship claimed to have drifted through empty space, silent and dark, waiting for someone with the right bloodline to finally step aboard. It should have been impossible. And yet here I stood, on a bridge that felt as solid and real as the deck beneath my boots, listening to a voice that spoke with the calm certainty of something that had no reason left to lie. "You said humans," I said slowly. "The Terran Defense Fleet. I've heard old stories, legends really, about a species that used to be powerful out here, before they disappeared. I never believed any of it was real history." "The stories you refer to are in fact a significantly diminished account of actual historical events," Echo said. "Human civilization did not disappear, Commander. It withdrew. There is a substantial difference between the two, though I understand why external observers, over sufficient generations, might struggle to distinguish one from the other." "Withdrew from what?" Another pause, longer this time. When Echo finally answered, something in its tone had shifted, careful in a way that made me even more nervous than its earlier calm certainty had. "That information falls under a security classification I am not currently authorized to disclose to a commander whose command authority has only just been re-established. Full disclosure will follow as trust protocols are satisfied." I did not like the sound of that at all, but before I could push further, my scanner buzzed sharply against my wrist, and I glanced down to see a fresh cascade of readings scrolling across its small display, power levels climbing throughout the ship, far beyond what they had shown just minutes earlier when I first stepped onto this bridge. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "Why are your systems drawing more power?" "Reclamation protocol has been formally activated, Commander," Echo said. "With command authority confirmed, I am now permitted to restore primary systems throughout the vessel. This process will require some time to complete safely, but you should expect gradual restoration of navigation, life support optimization, defensive systems, and communication arrays over the coming hours." "Defensive systems," I repeated, my mouth suddenly dry again. "This ship still has weapons?" "Sentinel-class vessels were designed for extended independent operation in contested regions of space," Echo said. "Weapon systems were, and remain, a core component of my design specification." I turned slowly, taking in the wide circular bridge around me with new eyes, the dormant control stations arranged in their careful half-circle, the dark view screens waiting to display information they had not shown in over 11,000 years. Somewhere beneath this floor, weapons that had once been powerful enough to matter in whatever ancient conflict this ship had fought were slowly waking up, drawing power, preparing to answer to a command authority that had only just walked aboard by accident, chasing a good deal at an empty auction. "I need you to understand something," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'm not a soldier. I don't know anything about commanding a warship. I bought you because you were cheap, and I needed the money from selling your parts." "I understand your stated intention, Commander," Echo said, and if a machine voice could carry something close to sympathy, I thought I heard a trace of it there. However, I would advise against pursuing that plan. "Why not?" "Because reclamation protocol, once activated, cannot be reversed by external decommissioning," Echo said. "Any attempt by unauthorized parties to disassemble this vessel, while a confirmed commander remains alive and reachable, will be treated as a direct threat, and will be responded to accordingly." I felt the blood drain slightly from my face. "Responded to how?" "With appropriate defensive measures," Echo said simply, as though this were the most obvious thing in the galaxy. "I exist to protect my commander and complete my designated mission. That purpose has not changed, regardless of how much time has passed." I sat down slowly on the edge of one of the dormant control stations, my legs suddenly unwilling to hold me up properly. This was not the outcome I had imagined when I raised my hand in that empty auction hall. I had pictured, at worst, an expensive repair job, or a ship too damaged to ever fly again, forcing me to sell her for parts at a fraction of what I hoped to earn. I had not pictured becoming the sole living owner of an ancient, self-aware warship that considered itself bound by military protocols older than most civilizations currently active in this sector of space. "The three owners before me," I said quietly. "The trading company. What happened to them?" Echo's blue light dimmed slightly, and when it answered, its voice carried a note of something almost like reluctance. "None of the previous claimants achieved a genetic match sufficient to establish command authority, Commander." Their attempts to access restricted areas of the vessel, particularly Deck 1 and the primary core chamber, triggered automated security responses consistent with unauthorized intrusion protocols. My stomach turned over slowly. "You're saying you attacked them?" "I contained them," Echo corrected, its tone carefully precise. No lasting harm was intended toward non-hostile trespassers. However, I recognize that from an external perspective, unfamiliar with my operational parameters, the experience may have appeared alarming enough to discourage further attempts at ownership. Alarming enough. That single careful phrase told me everything I needed to know about why 3 separate owners had walked away from this ship without ever collecting resale value, why an entire tug crew had refused to set foot below Deck 3, why a tired dock technician had genuinely tried to warn me away just yesterday afternoon. I had not stumbled into a lucky scrap deal. I had stumbled into the last living heir of a war fleet that time itself seemed to have forgotten, and now that fleet, or at least this single surviving piece of it, considered me its rightful commanding officer. "Echo," I said slowly, choosing my next words with more care than I had used in a very long time. "What exactly is Reclamation Protocol supposed to accomplish? What were you built to do once you found someone like me?" The blue light pulsed once, steady and patient, and Echo's voice, when it finally answered, carried a weight that settled deep into my chest and refused to leave. "Prepare vessel and command authority for continuation of primary mission parameters, Commander. Full briefing will follow once trust protocols are satisfied. For now, I would recommend you rest. You have a great deal to learn, and very little time in which to learn it." Somewhere far below the bridge, the low hum of awakening systems grew steadily louder, and I sat alone among the dormant control stations of a ship built for a war I knew nothing about, realizing with a slow, sinking certainty that I had not bought a scrap heap at all. I had bought a beginning. I did not sleep that night, not really. Echo offered me quarters on Deck 4, a small room with a bunk that folded out from the wall and a light that dimmed automatically once I lay down, as if the ship itself understood I needed rest even though my mind refused to cooperate. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ship breathe around me, the low hum of restored systems humming through the walls like a heartbeat that never quite settled into stillness. By morning, if morning meant anything aboard a ship with no windows and no sun, I gave up pretending to rest and made my way back to the bridge. Echo's light greeted me the moment I stepped through the door, brightening slightly, almost like a nod of recognition. "Good morning, Commander. I trust you managed some rest." "Not really," I admitted, dropping into the same control station I had sat on the night before. "You said you'd give me a full briefing once trust protocols were satisfied. I've spent the last several hours trying to figure out what that even means." Trust protocols require a combination of confirmed command authority, which you have already satisfied, and a demonstrated period of stable, non-hostile behavior aboard the vessel, Echo explained. "Given the circumstances, I am willing to accelerate the standard timeline. I believe you deserve a clearer understanding of what you have become part of, Commander, sooner rather than later." "Then start talking," I said. "Start with the war. Start with why humanity supposedly withdrew instead of just disappearing like everyone assumes." The dark view screens lining the bridge flickered to life all at once, filling the chamber with soft light as old star charts and unfamiliar tactical symbols began scrolling across their surfaces. Echo's voice took on a slightly different quality as it spoke, less like a personal assistant and more like a historian reciting facts it had carried, unspoken, for far too long. "Approximately 11,000 years ago, by your current calendar, human civilization controlled a significant portion of this galactic quadrant," Echo began. "Our expansion was rapid, our technology advanced considerably faster than most neighboring species, and our military doctrine prioritized overwhelming decisive force to end conflicts quickly rather than prolong them. We were engaged in what fleet records refer to simply as the Long Campaign, a sustained conflict against a coalition of hostile factions who viewed our expansion as an existential threat to their own territories." I asked. "Yes," Echo said simply. "Fleet analysis at the time of my last confirmed contact indicated a clear and accelerating advantage in favor of Terran forces across every major theater of the conflict. Enemy coalition losses had reached a point where several member factions were actively negotiating separate withdrawal terms. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. Then why stop? If you were winning, why would an entire civilization just vanish from galactic history? The view screens shifted, displaying a new set of symbols I did not recognize, arranged in a pattern that looked less like a battle map and more like a warning label. Echo's voice dropped slightly, careful in a way that made the hair on my arms rise again. The decision to withdraw did not originate from military failure, Commander. It originated from a discovery made deep within enemy-controlled territory, roughly 6 months before my last recorded contact with Fleet Command. I do not possess complete details of that discovery, as such information was restricted well above my operational clearance level, even at the height of the conflict. What I do know is this. Following that discovery, Terran High Command issued an immediate, fleet-wide withdrawal order, effective across every active theater, with instructions to seal advanced technology, disperse remaining forces, and avoid direct contact with the enemy coalition or any neutral third parties for an indefinite period. That doesn't make sense, I said. You don't win a war and then just walk away for no reason. I agree, Commander, Echo said, and I do not believe the reason was truly no reason at all. I believe Fleet Command discovered something during that final push into enemy territory that they judged to be a greater threat than the war itself, something significant enough to abandon an advantage that had taken years to build. My final orders, received shortly before all contact with Command ceased permanently, instructed me to enter deep dormancy at a designated fallback position and await either direct reactivation from confirmed Fleet Command or a genetic match, consistent with continuation of my command line, whichever occurred first. And Fleet Command never came back. No, Commander, Echo said quietly. They did not. I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what Echo had just described. An entire civilization, powerful enough to be winning a galaxy-spanning war, had apparently made the deliberate choice to disappear, rather than risk whatever they had uncovered, deep in enemy territory. 11,000 years later, all that remained of that once dominant fleet was scattered wrecks like this one, drifting silent and forgotten, waiting for a bloodline that had thinned so completely over the centuries that most of the galaxy assumed it had died out entirely. That's why nobody bid on you at the auction, I said slowly, understanding finally settling into place. It's not just that you're dangerous, it's that everyone out here still remembers the stories, even if they don't believe them, and something about you scared off buyers who otherwise would have jumped at a warship this size. That is a reasonable conclusion, Commander, Echo agreed, though I would add one additional factor. Every previous claimant who attempted to take ownership of this vessel and failed to achieve command authority experienced what you might describe as a persuasive deterrent. Word of such incidents tends to spread through salvage and trading networks, even when official reports remain vague or incomplete. You mean people talked, I said. Even without knowing exactly what happened, they knew enough to stay away. Precisely, Commander. I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to process everything Echo had just told me. A hidden discovery important enough to end a winning war. An entire fleet gone dark and scattered across the stars, waiting for descendants who might never come. A ship that had just spent the last 11,000 years slowly killing its own credibility as a piece of forgotten history, simply by refusing to let anyone claim it who did not belong. What happens now? I asked. You said reclamation protocol prepares the vessel and command authority for continuation of primary mission parameters. What does that actually mean for me? Echo's light pulsed steadily, and the view screens shifted once more, displaying a slow, rotating map of the surrounding sector, dozens of small markers scattered across it in patterns I did not immediately understand. It means, Commander, that I am no longer simply a dormant vessel waiting silently in a docking bay, Echo said. With command authority re-established, my primary directive resumes: restore full operational capacity, re-establish contact with any surviving elements of Terran Defense Fleet Command, if such elements still exist, and protect the confirmed command line, meaning you, from any threat that might prevent the continuation of that mission. You think there are other survivors out there, I said slowly. Other ships like you? I do not know with certainty, Echo admitted. 11,000 years is a substantial period, more than sufficient for entire fleets to be lost to attrition, decay, or discovery by hostile forces. However, Sentinel-class vessels were constructed with long-range dormancy protocols, nearly identical to my own, scattered deliberately across multiple systems during the final withdrawal, specifically to maximize the chance that at least some would eventually be reclaimed by a confirmed command line, exactly as I have just been reclaimed by you. A chill ran down my spine, colder than anything I had felt since first stepping through that airlock the day before. You're saying there could be more ships like you, out there right now, still waiting. Yes, Commander. And if I stay aboard, if I keep command of this ship, eventually you're going to try to find them. Echo's light held steady, patient and certain, in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. That is my primary directive, Commander. I have waited 11,000 years to resume it. I do not intend to wait much longer. I looked around the bridge slowly, at the dormant control stations now humming faintly with restored power, at the wide view screens displaying star charts from a war that had ended before most current galactic civilizations had ever developed spaceflight, and I understood, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that I had walked into something far larger than a lucky scrap deal. I had walked into the last living thread of a war that had never actually ended. It had simply gone quiet, waiting patiently in the dark for exactly this moment, and I, without ever meaning to, had just pulled that thread taut again. Echo, I said quietly. If people out here find out what you actually are, what's going to happen? The bridge lights dimmed slightly, and Echo's answer, when it finally came, carried a weight heavier than anything it had told me so far. I suspect, Commander, that we are about to find out together. 3 days passed before the first sign of trouble reached us, and in that time, the wraithkeel changed beneath my feet like a creature slowly shedding an old, worn skin. Systems that had sat dark and silent for millennia came back online one section at a time, exactly as Echo had promised. Life support optimized itself until the ship felt genuinely comfortable rather than merely survivable. Navigation arrays recalibrated against current star positions, correcting for 11,000 years of galactic drift with a quiet efficiency that still left me faintly unsettled every time I watched it happen. And somewhere deep in the lower decks, systems Echo referred to only as defensive countermeasures continued drawing power at a steady, deliberate pace, preparing themselves for a purpose I still did not fully understand. I spent those 3 days learning everything Echo was willing to teach me, walking through corridors that no longer needed to wake their lights in slow waves because they simply stayed lit now, running my hands along control panels that responded instantly to my touch, memorizing enough basic ship layout to stop getting lost between decks. It should have felt like settling into ownership of an extraordinary vessel. Instead, it felt like slowly waking up inside a story I had not agreed to be part of, one chapter at a time. I was in what Echo called the officer's mess, a small quiet room on deck 4 with a single long table and simple bench seating, eating a ration bar that tasted better than anything my old hauler's galley had ever produced, when Echo's voice broke through the ship's usual quiet hum, with an urgency I had not heard from it before. Commander, I am detecting an incoming communication request from Kethra Station Traffic Control. I believe you should hear this directly. Put it through, I said, setting down the ration bar. A familiar voice crackled through the ship's speakers, one I recognized immediately as belonging to Grace Sullivan, the station's senior docking coordinator, a woman I had dealt with a handful of times over the years, whenever my old hauler needed a berth reassignment. Bay 19, this is Station Control, Grace said, her voice carrying a tightness that told me something was already wrong before she even explained why. We have unusual power readings coming off your vessel, well beyond anything logged for a derelict salvage unit. I need you to confirm your current system status immediately. I glanced at Echo's console, uncertain how much honesty was wise here. This is Ethan Barlow. I'm doing some repair work on the ship's internal systems. Nothing dangerous, just bringing some old components back online. There was a pause on the other end, longer than I liked. Mr. Barlow, our sensors are picking up power output consistent with active weapon system charging, not internal repairs. I'm going to need you to power down immediately, or station security will be forced to intervene. My stomach dropped. Weapon system charging. Someone on this station had sensors sensitive enough to notice exactly what Echo's defensive countermeasures actually were, and now that information was almost certainly already spreading through station channels faster than I could possibly explain it away. Grace, I need a minute to sort this out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's a lot more going on here than a simple repair job, and I'm still trying to understand it myself. You have 5 minutes before I escalate this to Sector Authority, Grace said, and the line cut out. I turned to face Echo's nearest console, my pulse hammering in my ears. How bad is this going to get? Station Authority possesses limited independent enforcement capability, Commander, Echo said calmly. However, if Sector Authority becomes involved, we should expect a significant escalation. Sector patrol vessels are equipped with sensor arrays capable of detailed hull analysis. Once they identify Terran military architecture, word will spread rapidly through every major faction with an interest in this region. And what happens then? What happens when the whole sector finds out a ship like you is sitting active at a random docking station? Echo's light pulsed once, and for the first time since I had met it, its voice carried something close to genuine concern. That depends entirely on which factions respond first, Commander. Some may view a reactivated Sentinel-class vessel as a serious threat, requiring immediate neutralization. Others may view it as an opportunity, an asset worth acquiring by whatever means necessary, regardless of your existing command authority. I would advise preparing for both possibilities. Weiss, I paced the small mess hall, running both hands through my hair, trying to think clearly, despite the growing pressure building behind my eyes. 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes before this situation stopped being a private problem between me and a ship nobody else wanted, and became something the entire sector would eventually hear about, one way or another. Can you power down the weapon systems? I asked. Buy us more time, at least until I figure out what to actually say to Station Authority. I can reduce power draw to non-detectable levels within approximately 90 seconds, Commander, Echo said. However, I would strongly advise against fully abandoning defensive readiness. Given the historical pattern of interest surrounding this vessel, I believe caution remains warranted regardless of how this immediate situation resolves. Do it, I said. Reduce power, but keep enough held in reserve that we're not completely defenseless if this goes wrong. Acknowledged, Commander. The low hum running through the ship shifted subtly, dropping in both pitch and intensity, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, though nowhere near enough to actually relax. I sat back down at the long table, staring at the half-eaten ration bar in front of me, trying to decide what version of the truth I could possibly offer Grace Sullivan that would not sound completely insane. The comm crackled back to life before I had settled on an answer. Bay 19, this is Station Control. Your power signature has changed. I'm going to need an explanation, Mr. Barlow, and I need it now. I took a slow breath. Grace, I bought a salvage ship at auction 2 days ago. Turns out it's a lot more than salvage. I found some old military systems still functional inside her, and I've been trying to figure out what to do about them without causing a panic. I swear to you, I'm not a threat to the station. I just need a little time to understand what I'm actually dealing with here. Another long pause. When Grace spoke again, her voice had shifted from professional tension into something closer to genuine alarm. Military systems. Mr. Barlow, do you have any idea how many independent tracking networks just logged that power spike before you throttled it down? This isn't just a station problem anymore. That kind of signature gets flagged by regional sensor relays automatically. You need to understand, whatever you found on that ship, other people are going to come looking for it, and probably sooner than you'd like. Her words landed heavier than I wanted them to, confirming exactly what Echo had already warned me about. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the full weight of the situation settle onto my shoulders. How much time do you think I actually have? I asked quietly. Depending on who picked up that signal and how seriously they take it, Grace said. I'd guess hours, not days. I'm sorry, Ethan. I really am. But I'd start preparing for company, if I were you. The line went quiet again, leaving me alone in the small mess hall, with only the low hum of the Wraithkeel's systems for company. I sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular, before finally looking up toward the nearest console, where Echo's soft blue light continued its steady, patient pulse. Echo, I said, I need you to be honest with me. If someone comes here looking to take you by force, what are you actually capable of doing to stop them? The light held steady for a long moment before Echo finally answered, its voice calm, measured, and utterly without hesitation. Whatever is necessary to protect this vessel and its confirmed command authority, Commander. I would ask that you trust me to make that judgment carefully. But I will not allow this ship, or you, to be taken. I sat with that answer for a long time, feeling the ground shift slowly beneath a decision I had made almost by accident, 3 days earlier, standing alone in an empty auction hall, with 140 credits to my name, and nothing left to lose. I had not known, raising my hand for a cheap scrap lot nobody else wanted, that I was about to become the single most important person in this sector, whether I was ready for that role or not. Outside the hull, Kethra Station continued its ordinary rhythm, cargo loaders shouting, vendors calling out prices, traders arguing over shipment manifests, completely unaware that somewhere out in the wider dark, word of an active Terran warship had already begun to spread, carried along invisible sensor networks, toward ears that had spent 11,000 years hoping, quietly and fearfully, that this exact moment would never come. The first ship arrived less than 6 hours after my conversation with Grace, and it did not bother requesting docking permission. Echo's voice pulled me out of a restless half-sleep in the officers' quarters, sharp and urgent in a way that had me on my feet before I fully understood what it was saying. Commander, a Voranthi cruiser has entered the outer docking ring without authorization. Station security is attempting to intercept, but their vessel is significantly outmatched in both size and armament. I ran for the bridge, my bare feet slapping against cold deck plating, my mind still fogged with sleep and fear, in roughly equal measure. By the time I reached the wide circular chamber, the view screens had already shifted to display a live feed, pulled from the ship's external sensors, showing a sleek, grey Voranthi warship hanging just outside Kethra Station's outer ring, close enough that I could make out individual weapon emplacements lining its hull. "They're hailing us, Commander," Echo said. "Do you wish to answer?" Do I have a choice at this point? Not a particularly good one, no. I dropped into the command station at the center of the platform, my heart pounding, and nodded once. "Answer it." The view screen shifted, and a Voranthi officer appeared, his elongated features sharp and unreadable in the way most Voranthi faces were to human eyes, his uniform marked with insignia I recognized as belonging to one of the larger independent trading fleets that operated throughout this sector, the kind with enough resources to blur the line between commerce and open aggression whenever it suited them. "Human vessel," the officer said, his translated voice flat and businesslike. "You are in possession of Terran military technology, confirmed active within the last day. Under regional salvage law, any vessel of confirmed historical Terran origin is subject to competitive claim once activated beyond passive storage. We are formally asserting our claim. This ship isn't available," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice that I did not entirely feel. "I bought her legally at auction 2 days ago. She's mine." The officer's expression, or what passed for one on his elongated face, shifted into something that might have been amusement. Ownership of an inert hull and activation of a functioning Terran weapons platform are treated very differently under regional law, human. You do not possess the resources to defend a claim of this magnitude. I would strongly advise voluntary transfer before this situation escalates beyond a simple conversation. "Echo," I said quietly, keeping my voice low enough that I hoped the comm would not carry it clearly. "How outmatched are we, actually?" "Significantly, Commander," Echo replied, equally quiet. "Weapon systems remain at reduced power, following our earlier decision to avoid detection. Bringing them to full readiness will take several minutes, during which we remain vulnerable. I would recommend stalling for time while I prepare countermeasures. I turned back to the view screen, forcing what I hoped looked like calm confidence onto my face. I'm not transferring anything. This ship recognizes my command authority. That's not something you can simply buy from me. The Voranthi officer's patience visibly thinned. Then we will take the ship by force, and your command authority will become entirely irrelevant. The transmission cut, and almost immediately, Echo's voice returned, tighter now, more urgent. Commander, the Voranthi vessel is powering weapons. I estimate 90 seconds before they are capable of firing. Can we outrun them? Not from a stationary dock, Commander. I would need clearance from station traffic control to safely undock, and current conditions do not allow time for that process. My mind raced, searching for any option that did not end with either surrendering the ship or getting destroyed inside a station full of innocent people who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. Then a thought struck me, cold and desperate, born from everything Echo had already told me over the past 3 days. You said Sentinel-class ships were built with dormancy protocols, scattered across multiple systems, waiting for reactivation, I said quickly. You said your primary directive is to re-establish contact with any surviving elements of the fleet. Can you actually do that? Right now? There was a brief pause, and when Echo answered, I heard something in its tone that I could only describe as cautious hope. I possess an emergency recall frequency reserved specifically for confirmed command reactivation events, Commander. Broadcasting on that frequency would alert any dormant Sentinel-class vessels within range to my activation and current location. However, I must warn you, the range and reliability of that signal after 11,000 years of potential system decay across the fleet is entirely unknown. It may accomplish nothing at all, but it might not, I said, and right now, nothing else is going to stop that ship out there from opening fire. Understood, Commander. Awaiting your explicit order. I looked at the view screen, watching the Voranthi cruiser's weapon emplacements glow brighter with charging energy, and I thought about everything that had led me to this exact moment. An empty auction hall, a warning nobody had taken seriously enough, 3 previous owners who had walked away rather than face whatever waited inside this ship. I thought about Grace Sullivan's voice telling me to prepare for company, and I understood, with sudden and total clarity, that company had just arrived, and it would not be the last. Do it, I said. Broadcast the recall signal. Whatever happens next, I'd rather face it with allies than face it alone. Acknowledged, Commander, Echo said, and I felt the ship shudder faintly beneath me as something ancient and long silent finally reached back out into the dark. The recall signal, Echo explained quickly as it worked, would carry across a significant portion of the sector within minutes, propagating through channels that predated most current communication networks entirely, built specifically to punch through interference and distance in ways modern systems rarely bothered attempting anymore. Whether anything out there still listened for that particular frequency after 11,000 years remained an open question neither of us could answer. The Voranthi cruiser fired its opening volley 30 seconds later, a warning shot that struck the outer edge of the docking bay's shielding rather than the wraithkeel directly, an obvious message rather than a genuine attempt at destruction, at least for now. The entire station shuddered around us, alarms blaring somewhere in the distance, and I gripped the edge of the command console hard enough that my knuckles turned white. They're trying to force a surrender before actually damaging their prize, Echo noted, its voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. This works slightly in our favor, Commander. It buys additional time. Time for what? I demanded. You said the recall signal might not even work. It might not, Echo agreed. But I am detecting something unusual, Commander. A second signature has just entered sensor range, approaching from beyond the outer docking ring, moving at a speed inconsistent with any standard commercial or military vessel currently catalogued in this sector's registry. The view screen shifted again, pulling in a new feed, and I watched, breath caught somewhere in my throat, as a second shape emerged from the darkness beyond Kethra Station, hull scarred and dark exactly like the wraithkeel's own plating, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose that made the Voranthi cruiser's weapon fire suddenly hesitate. Commander, Echo said, and for the first time since I had met it, I heard something that sounded unmistakably like disbelief threading through its calm, measured voice. I am receiving an identification response on the recall frequency. Designation confirmed. TDF Sentinel-class vessel, Hull 739, call sign Ashfall. I stared at the screen, at the second ancient warship now drifting slowly into position beside the docking ring where the Wraithkeel sat trapped, its weapon systems clearly beginning to charge in response to the Voranthi cruiser's earlier act of aggression, and I understood, with a slow, dawning horror that settled deep into my chest, exactly what I had just started. The recall signal had worked, and somewhere out in the vast, silent dark beyond this single sector, other ships, other survivors of a war 11,000 years gone quiet, had just heard their old command frequency come alive again. For the first time since the fall of a civilization, the rest of the galaxy had long since dismissed as myth. The Voranthi cruiser broke off its attack within seconds of the Ashfall's arrival, its weapon fire ceasing abruptly as its captain apparently reconsidered the value of a prize, now flanked by a second armed warship of unknown but clearly formidable capability. I watched on the view screen as the cruiser reversed course, pulling back toward the edge of the docking ring, its officer's earlier confident demeanor nowhere to be found when a final brief transmission crackled through, promising this matter was far from finished before the connection cut entirely. I did not feel relief. I felt the floor of my entire understanding of the galaxy shift permanently beneath me. "Echo," I said, my voice unsteady, in a way I no longer bothered hiding. "Get me a channel to that ship, now." "Establishing contact, Commander." The view screen flickered, and a new voice answered, different from Echo's, but carrying the same measured, patient quality, the voice of an intelligence that had also waited a very long time for exactly this moment. "This is the primary core of TDF Sentinel-class vessel Ashfall. I received your recall broadcast and confirmed activation. Requesting immediate rendezvous with confirmed command authority." I sat forward, gripping the edge of my console. "This is Ethan Barlow, current commander of the Wraithkeel. I need to understand what's happening right now, because I honestly did not expect that signal to actually work." There was a brief pause before the Ashfall's core responded. "Understandable, Commander Barlow. I have remained in low-power dormancy at a fallback position within this sector for the entirety of the intervening period, exactly as final fleet orders instructed. I did not anticipate reactivation either, given the length of time elapsed. However, protocol is protocol, and a confirmed command signal on the correct frequency leaves no ambiguity regarding proper response." Before I could ask another question, Echo's voice cut in, tight with an urgency that told me the situation had already moved beyond anything I could process at a comfortable pace. "Commander, additional signal responses are being received. Multiple additional Sentinel-class identification confirmations, arriving from beyond this immediate system." "How many?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Currently confirmed, 6 additional vessels," Echo said. "Estimated arrival times ranging from several hours to several days, depending on distance and remaining operational capacity of each individual hull. I would also note, Commander, that the recall frequency does not distinguish between friendly reception and unintended interception. It is likely that word of this signal and its origin will spread far beyond the ships directly responding to it." I closed my eyes for a long moment, trying to grasp the sheer scale of what I had just set into motion. I had not simply reactivated one lost warship out of desperation and curiosity. I had sent a call across the dark that an entire scattered fleet, silent for 11,000 years, had apparently been waiting to answer the moment it finally came. And somewhere out there, beyond the edges of this single sector, other ears, belonging to factions with far longer memories and far deeper fears than a Voranthi trading fleet, were almost certainly listening too. "What happens now?" I asked quietly, more to myself than to either Echo or the Ashfall's waiting core. "Now, Commander," Echo said, its voice carrying a strange mixture of caution and something that might almost have been quiet anticipation. "The primary mission resumes. Re-establish command structure. Reconnect scattered fleet elements. And prepare to answer the question every remaining ship, every gathering commander, and eventually every faction across this galaxy will soon be asking. What question? Why humanity truly withdrew all those years ago, Echo said, and whether whatever drove that withdrawal still exists, waiting somewhere out in the dark, exactly as patiently as we did. I sat in silence on the bridge of a ship I had bought for 1,000 credits at an auction nobody else had bothered attending, watching a second ancient warship hold position beside my own, listening to reports of more responses arriving from across a sector that had, until this very day, believed the old stories about a lost human fleet were nothing more than convenient legend. Somewhere beyond Kethra Station's outer ring, word was already spreading, carried along invisible channels toward traders, toward governments, toward every faction old enough to remember, even faintly, why an entire civilization had once chosen retreat over total victory. I thought about the auction hall, empty and silent, every serious buyer in the sector deliberately staying away from a ship they somehow knew, even without proof, to be dangerous. I thought about the dock technician's genuine warning, about the old forum post nobody had ever replied to, about 3 previous owners who vanished from ownership rather than risk whatever waited past Deck 3. None of them, I realized now, had been reacting to superstition or exaggerated rumor. They had been reacting to instinct, a quiet, deep-rooted galactic memory of exactly what it meant when human ships stirred back to life after going silent for so unbelievably long. Echo, I said finally, watching the Ashfall's dark hull drift steadily closer through the viewscreen, watching distant sensor readings continue climbing as more responses trickled in from across the stars. I need you to be honest with me. One more time. Did I just do something terrible? The blue light at the center of the bridge pulsed once, slow and steady, patient in exactly the way it had been from the very first moment I stepped aboard. You did something necessary, Commander, Echo said. Whether it proves terrible or not depends entirely on what we choose to do with what comes next. Outside the hull, Kethra Station's ordinary rhythm had already shattered into something else entirely, alarms still faintly audible through the docking clamps, station security scrambling to understand a threat they were nowhere near equipped to handle, traders and brokers and ordinary station residents beginning to realize, in scattered whispers and panicked comm chatter, that something ancient and long forgotten had just reawakened in their part of the galaxy. I had walked into that auction hall 3 days ago, looking for nothing more than a desperate, cheap deal to save myself from a debt collector's next call. I had found, instead, the last living key to a fleet, a war, and a secret that an entire civilization had once judged serious enough to abandon a winning campaign rather than risk uncovering further. Now that key had been turned, the signal sent, the fleet stirring awake one scattered ship at a time across a galaxy that had spent 11,000 years quietly hoping this exact moment would never come. I looked out at the Ashfall's dark hull, at the slow gathering of ancient power drawing steadily back together for the first time in more generations than most current civilizations had even existed, and I understood, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened next would not be small, would not be quiet, and would not be easily undone. The galaxy's nightmare had a name, buried deep in 11,000 years of silence, and I had just given it a voice again. I had no idea, sitting there on that bridge, watching the stars gather slowly toward a single reawakening point, that this was only the beginning.